was a moonless night when Eleanor Briggs, a 28-year-old photographer, decided to visit the old Hollowbrook Cemetery. She'd heard rumors that the graves there whispered at night, and as someone obsessed with documenting the supernatural, she couldn't resist. The cemetery was centuries old, overgrown with ivy and blanketed in thick fog. The wrought iron gates creaked open with a shrill cry that echoed through the silence. The air smelled of damp earth and decaying flowers. Eleanor clicked her flashlight on and began snapping photos of the moss-covered tombstones. Each time her camera flashed, she thought she saw a shadow move, but when she looked up, there was nothing. She brushed it off, until she noticed something strange. One of the photos she took showed a figure standing behind a grave, tall and thin, wearing what looked like a funeral veil. Her heart thudded. There was no one else there when she took it. Probably a trick of the light, she whispered to herself. But then, she heard it. A whisper, faint, almost like the wind. "Eleanor." She froze. No one knew she was here. The whisper came again, closer. "Eleanor, come here." Her flashlight flickered, and the beam landed on an old tombstone with her own last name, Briggs. The engraving beneath it read, "Eleanor Briggs, 1996-2024. Her breath caught in her throat. That's not possible. She backed away, trembling, but the ground beneath her shifted. The earth around the grave began to move, as though something was clawing its way up. She stumbled, dropping her flashlight. In the dim light, she saw a pale hand break through the soil. The whisper turned into a low moan, then a scream. The figure from her photo, the woman in the veil, was standing over the grave now, staring at her with hollow, black eyes. Eleanor turned to run, but every path she took seemed to lead back to the same grave. The headstones began to shake, the whispering growing into a chorus, hundreds of voices calling her name. She finally bolted toward the gate, but when she looked back one last time, she saw the figure holding her camera scrolling through the photos, one by one. The last image was of Eleanor's face, pale and terrified, being dragged into the earth. When the caretaker arrived the next morning, the gate was wide open, Eleanor's camera lying beside a freshly disturbed grave. On the screen, a single photo remained, the tombstone reading, "Eleanor Briggs, 1996-2024, and a faint whisper caught in the background audio, "Welcome home." It was almost midnight when David Carter, a young journalist, pulled up near the abandoned Ravenshade Cemetery. The graveyard had been closed for over 50 years after a series of strange disappearances. Locals warned him never to go there after dark, but David wanted a real story, something terrifying enough to make his career. The air was cold and heavy. The moon hid behind thick clouds, and the iron gate stood half broken, covered in rust. As David stepped inside, the silence pressed down on him. The wind didn't blow. The trees didn't move. It was as if the whole place was holding its breath. He turned on his flashlight. The beam swept across crooked tombstones and statues with blank, cracked faces. An angel statue nearby seemed to stare right at him, its stone eyes hollow, its smile faintly twisted. As David walked deeper, he found an old caretaker's hut. The wooden door was barely hanging on its hinges. Inside, everything was covered in dust, a broken chair, a lantern, and a journal lying open on a table. The last entry was dated October 16th, 1972. It read, "They won't let me leave. Every night, they call my name. The dead are not resting here, and soon, I won't be either." David frowned. He looked around, and that's when he heard it. A faint humming, a woman's voice, soft, broken, coming from outside. He stepped out, scanning the fog. The humming grew louder. Between the graves, a pale woman in a funeral gown stood facing a mausoleum. Her long hair covered her face. "Hello?" he called, his voice shaking. The woman stopped humming. Slowly, she turned toward him. Her face was gray, lifeless, her eyes pure white. In her hand, she held a rusted key. Before David could react, she spoke in a voice that sounded like the wind scraping through bones. "You shouldn't have come here. The keeper doesn't like visitors." The ground beneath him rumbled. The graves began to open, soil shifting as skeletal hands pushed through the dirt. David ran, tripping over broken stones. The fog thickened until he could barely see an inch ahead. He reached the gates, but they were closed now, sealed with thick iron chains that hadn't been there before. Behind him, something heavy dragged along the ground. He turned slowly. Standing in the fog was a tall figure in a long black coat and a wide-brimmed hat. His skin looked rotted, his eyes glowing a faint green. He carried a rusted lantern that flickered with ghostly light. "The keeper," David whispered. The figure raised his hand, pointing the lantern at him. Inside the glass, David saw faces screaming silently, twisting in agony. One of them looked horrifyingly familiar, his own. The keeper smiled. Every visitor leaves a piece of their soul behind. The fog swallowed everything. The next morning, the caretaker's hut door was found open. Inside lay David's notebook and camera. The last photo showed the entrance gate and a shadowed figure holding a lantern, standing exactly where David had vanished. And if you pass by Ravenshade Cemetery at night, some say you can still see a light moving through the graves and hear a voice whisper, "The keeper is always watching."